Well, good morning, everybody. Welcome to another You Be the Behavior Consultant. All right, looks like we've already got people here. That's very exciting. Hoping you can hear me well. They updated the software, and so that always means for me that I have to work out all the bugs and make sure everything is working. And Alex is here as well. Oh, good. I can hear myself. So it sounds like everything is working. That makes me very happy. So I'm super excited to cover this topic this morning. As I hope it wasn't too, I don't know, kind of, like too much of a teaser with the topic. Yes, and we've got all our regulars here. This is awesome. We're going to talk about basically opportunity bias and how it relates maybe to trade organizations. And the reason I wanted to explore this topic is I started doing some math. I realized I've been going to conferences for almost 30 years now. It's it's been a while, and I feel like I've had an opportunity to kind of be on both sides of the equation, as a participant, as somebody who's attended and participated in conferences for many years, and then I've also had the opportunity to sit on a board of directors. I've been on a conservation committee. I've also been I'm currently on an animal training committee, and I'm also an advisor for two other committees, one where I participate quite a bit and one where I'm not asked to do very much, so I don't do very much. And then I realized that over the years, I've actually probably been to conferences for maybe 15 different types of trade organizations. So I've kind of seen quite a wide variety of them and how they operate, from really small organizations to really massively big professional organizations that can have up to 2,000 participants at a time attending. So I've kind of seen a lot of different variety there. And yeah, so I kind of, I'm looking at my statistics here that I wrote down for myself so that I kind of remember everything there. And it's been really interesting to kind of watch how our industry, especially as it relates to animal training, has evolved over the years and how things are operating. And it just gave me some pause, some thought over the years how it's been changing in the 28 years that I've been attending conferences. And so I kind of thought it'd be interesting to discuss, having had those experiences as somebody in the audience and somebody in leadership roles. And I'd love to get your perspective on it too, especially some of you that attend conferences and maybe get to experience this as well. So anyway, so that's what kind of prompted this discussion. I had some fun playing around with AI to generate some images, so you'll get to see some of that and see what you think about that. Lots of slides this time, so let's dive into it. So this is You Be the Behavior Consultant. This is how it works. We've got a topic that I've already kind of introduced a little bit. I've got some questions to prompt your discussion. I really would love your input on this one. No video examples this week, but we got lots of fun AI pictures for you guys to explore and see what you think about those. And then of course we'll recap it at the end. So our topic this time, the opportunity divide. What information gets to influence animal training, and especially as it pertains to our industry. So the questions that really kind of got me thinking about all this is like, have you ever felt that a trade organization you belong to, maybe it isn't evolving or sharing fresh insights, maybe prompting you to look for your information elsewhere? And have you maybe been at a trade conference or event where the focus maybe felt misaligned, or maybe certain perspectives were excluded, or you couldn't pinpoint why is that happening? And then maybe you left a trade organization because it didn't embrace new ideas or offer opportunities for diverse perspectives. And that certainly has happened to me. So that was one of the reasons that I kind of wanted to explore this topic as well. So we're going to do a little background to kind of help maybe explore some things first before we dive into some other aspects about maybe what we can do to address some of these questions. And of course, that first means for folks that maybe don't participate in trade organization things, we do need to look at what a trade organization is. And basically, A trade organization is a group of people. It could be businesses and companies and professionals. It could even be students or aspiring professionals, or just even people who kind of are like-minded, who support what we're doing within a specific industry, that come together to promote their common interests. And that organization typically represents the collective voice with its members, and they work to influence policies. And I think that's really important in our industry, because what we find is our trade organizations do have the potential to influence what governments, what the government does and what it says, and set industry standards. And so that's why, it is important that we have input on our trade organizations. And that's why I go to these conferences and I listen and I hear what's being said. Obviously, they're great networking opportunities, and I think that's often one of the things that, I enjoy very much about going to those events, getting face-to-face with people. We often offer training and educational resources, and a lot of times these organizations are advocating for the economic and legal interests of the industry. They offer a platform for collaboration, sometimes research and development, and helping members stay informed about industry trends, which I think is pretty significant. Because if they're telling people this is what you should be paying attention to, that's really important for everybody to sort of be paying attention to. And again, we talked about regulatory changes. And then another thing that a lot of industries do is they talk about best practices. So the overreaching goal is to support the growth and sustainability of the industry. Boy, I better be better about my talking today, because I have lots of words to say. And if I'm stumbling over my words, it's going to be annoying for you all. And sustainability of the industry they represent. And I would say within the zoo community, and probably some of the other communities that we have represented here with our represented, did I say that right? With our folks here, that they're usually nonprofit and tax exempt, and that the people that are participating, they may be operating, the people that are participating in the trade organizations that are the leaders or doing the work, they often operate with limited or no paid staff, and they're pretty much relying heavily on volunteer efforts from their members to carry out their initiatives, like setting the standards, the advocacy, and organizing events. And so I think that's really important to remember, because I know the work I do for trade organizations has always been out of my pocket, out of my own time, voluntary. So you're really often doing it just because you believe it's important to give back to your professional industry, and you're hoping to help the industry grow and develop. And so it's really kind of selfless, I will say, if you're doing what you're supposed to be doing there in those organizations. So some of them do have paid staff, so I don't want to say, it's all for free. Sometimes the admins are paid. So, but generally in our industry, it's not a situation where you get income for it. So how do we try to keep that whole thing fair, though, and representative? So these are some of the things that in these trade organizations aim to do. So the membership tends to be open, it's not sort of, hand selecting who can be a member. Although there can be some criteria, that, I know certainly in the animal world, they're trying to make sure that you are legitimately a business or person with an interest in that particular field. So, there might be some vetting process there, but, it can be a wide range of businesses from small to large. And it can help, but I will say that it isn't a perfect process. There might be different membership levels, from like an associate to a professional to somewhere in between there, and students, there's certainly student levels. They try to have balanced governance, meaning a diverse board of directors, and again, usually there's a nomination process, and you get to read all the bios, and then the membership gets to vote on that. But again, I will say that there can be challenges with that and maintaining diversity there. and we'll talk a little bit more about some of the challenges with that. And then there's committees that can have a special focus, whether it's regulation, ethics, in our case, like, there might be an animal training committee, a conservation committee, and it often includes members from various parts of the industry. And again, this can help, but we can see that there are ways around this where it can become a little bit one-sided with a lot of representation from one group. So you have to be careful with some of those things, but we'll talk more about that in a bit here. So some other things that can help with keeping it fair and representative is transparent decision making. So are there really clear policies and bylaws? And I will say one of the things that I notice a lot is that I don't know that all the members pay attention to these things. I do, as somebody that's been quite involved with trade organizations for a long time. I think these are really important things that need to happen. Like, bylaws are really boring to read, and policy and guidelines and things like that are really boring to read. It's like reading legal documents, but it's really important that that you do pay attention to those, because there are some things in there that can really set things up to be unfair. So I would, when they ask a member to vote on that, it's worth reading what that thing says, or you can end up with situations where certain individuals or it sets it up so that people can have a lot of power over other people. And another one of those for me that's a really huge one is a conflict of interest policy. And I do see where a lot of trade organizations don't have conflict of interest policies. And what does that mean? So that's what my little diagram is there. This is where like personal interests or agendas, financial interests are overlapping with the professional obligation. And so in reality, when you're serving as a leader, whether you're on a committee, well, and not even if you're a leader, even if you're just a member of an organization, you're getting up there and giving a lecture, you're really just doing a professional obligation. Your personal interest and your financial interest shouldn't overlap with your professional obligation. You're just there to serve the industry. You're not supposed to be there serving your personal interest or your financial interest. So like some of the trade organizations where I present, like if it's at a large veterinary conference where it's like 2,000, or the ABAI where it's, again, Association Behavior Analysis International, you have to, one of the terms you have to agree to is that you will not conduct a conflict of interest, meaning that you're not going to get up there and sell your product in your lecture. So that's, those are typically some of those bigger events. More established trade organizations are pretty clear on that. And I don't always see that in some of the other trade organizations that are still kind of developing. But there's plenty of other examples of conflict of interest that can happen. So, but those are like the key things to consider. When is it a conflict of interest? Is when you see that overlap there. Ways for our membership to communicate. So is there a way for them to, let the leadership know about things that they would like to talk about? And that can be through meetings. It can be through surveys. There's lots of different ways there. Let's talk about some other things here. Focusing on industry-wide issues. So that can be a whole bunch of things. So it could be research and data to help with those policies, so that they're a little bit more objective. And then I think one thing, standards and best practices. I think a lot of our animal training organizations do try to produce those types of documents that can help not just specific individuals, but sort of broad-reaching efforts for the entire trade organization. So something that might impact a lot of people in a positive way. And then ethical guidelines that are again sort of trying to reach the entire industry and sort of help large groups of people that might be having a common interest. And let's see. Okay, so now let's talk about diversity and how that can serve trade organizations. And again, there's going to be some caveats here. So I'll get back and I'll get to that in a little bit here. And I'm sorry, I should be checking for your comments too. So how can diversity serve trade organizations? And so we do think about like having a variety of contributors, so that can include various voices in publications and webinars and conferences and other content formats. And that, of course, can include featuring a diverse representation of speakers and authors that may come from lots of different members of the organization, or maybe even outside of the organization. So I have in my little pie chart, maybe the organization has all these different types of members included in it. And maybe you want to have a mix of speakers or content creators from those different types of facilities, so that you have a good representation of content that serves all those different types of members that are within your organization. But you also need to have editorial policies, and that can help with that diversity, and also making sure that that content is hopefully aligned with some of those guidelines that you've prepared previously and goes with your policy. And then diverse representation in leadership and spokespeople. So again, I'm going to touch on this a little bit later too, when we get into monitoring some of this stuff. Because having diverse leadership on the board, for example, you don't want like the same people from the same company all on the board of directors. It would be good, again, to have like a nice representation from all these different companies or pieces of the pie of your membership. If it's made up of a lot of different types of people, maybe have that kind of background on your board of directors and on your committees, so that all those different interests are represented. I still can't talk today, boy. I don't know. And then again, maybe having those people rotate a bit if you can, so you get those various inputs and viewpoints, especially if the industry is changing. But again, we're going to touch on this a little bit later, so hang on to that thought. And then a little bit more on this. We want this opportunity for emerging voices, again, for those smaller platforms that maybe don't always get heard, because they're also bringing new insights. I think, some of the things we have done in our private platform, which, obviously my company is a private platform, we've given an opportunity for some of those voices that didn't really get a spotlight as much. They may have gotten a little opportunity here and there, but then they kind of got buried. But because we thought their information was so good, we felt like, it needs more exposure. And I think it's a shame that sometimes those guys didn't get very much exposure through trade organizations for various reasons, but they had really good information. And I think sometimes some of the folks that maybe aren't getting the opportunity to speak very often, they may not have a lot of public speaking experience. And that is a really cool thing that a trade organization could offer, is they could offer mentorship and training and give those people a really nice opportunity to do that public speaking and get those opportunities, so they get the confidence and skills to represent the industry, especially when they're having some cool ideas. One of the things I've often said is some of the best ideas come from folks that are just doing things because they're trying to figure out a way to make something work. And they may not be the ones that are the most well-known or prominent in the industry, but they come up with amazing ideas, but they're just maybe not the ones that are always out there doing public speaking. And so, but they come up with amazing ideas, and they just need an opportunity and a platform to share them. And again, if we are talking to the membership and getting feedback from them, if there is some mechanism for that, you may find out more about what people are interested in actually learning about. And so that is a really important thing to make available to them. And again, so there's that input, but then I think one of the things that people that are in some of these leadership roles, I think they have a responsibility to have their finger on the pulse of what are emerging topics and be on the lookout for that, so that they can help that trade organization progress and be progressive and give some and help the industry grow and progress in new directions as well. Let's see, what else do we have here? So also how that information is delivered. There are different ways that can be delivered. So whether it's, through events like our, conferences and panels and speakers and podcasting or whatever, those events also need to have sort of equal representation and diversity. So making sure that there are lots of different people participating in those. And again, as we were saying earlier, making sure that that content is included in there is diverse as well. So I'm not going to spend too much time on this slide. I think we've kind of covered that topic as well. So what else? Also, recognition of diverse achievements. So sometimes I see awards kind of being given to the same people and over again. Maybe it's, it's deserving. Maybe that's okay. But I think there's I think sometimes if those people that are not being mentored or fostered, their growth isn't being fostered, then those other people aren't rising, so to speak. And so I think it's helpful and sometimes I think they also might feel a little intimidated to put their material out there. And so they're not getting the opportunity for their information to be seen. So again, I think, it's good to kind of encourage and foster more people to participate in those recognition programs so that we can get more innovation and more opportunities for other folks to get recognition. So I think that's great too. And also, are we monitoring for diversity? Are we looking into that trade organization and making sure that there is some diversity going on there and look for those gaps? And again, getting feedback from the organization. And I think it's helpful if sometimes that feedback is anonymous so people feel comfortable sharing. But I also think it's good to monitor that, have one submission per person, because I think there can be campaigns sometimes because people might have personal agendas and it might be like, oh, I'm just going to hammer something so that I can get what I want. So you have to be careful about that too. There's always sort of two sides to the coin there. Okay, so I wanted to get back to this leadership thing and monitoring bias, how we can monitor that. So when we talk about the diversity in the leadership, I wanted to be careful about this, because even though sometimes we see leadership that's the same over and over again, and that can be a challenge, and same with repetition of speakers and authors, I think that also can be a challenge too. I will say we have to evaluate it with caution, because again, having been on both sides of the equation, finding competent volunteers to lead, speak, or write is also challenging. So this also may be part of the reason why there is a lack of diversity. And again, so like I was saying earlier, sometimes people don't feel comfortable stepping up to the plate, and there needs to be some more mentoring and helping people grow into those positions or grow into their confidence of being a speaker or an author. And so I think having programs that can help mentor folks into those positions is really helpful too. So I think it's also important to evaluate this before immediately going to, we got to just, move that person out and move somebody else in. So I always kind of look at this with a little bit of caution because I don't want to just get rid of somebody fantastic just for the sake of diversity. So some of our repeat speakers and leaders may be really well vetted and bring consistently good info, and leadership and leaders and content providers may be working absolutely selflessly with integrity despite being the same individuals. And so I wouldn't want to automatically say, oh, they've just got to go because we need diversity. So what I would say to that is, hold on, some leaders are really, really good. And so there are some strategies we can think about to, what do we do with that? So there can be some value to keeping board or committee members in place under certain conditions, such as they're performing really well and there's no suitable replacements available. And I think that's one of the things that I've seen in some situations is that nobody wants the job and the person doing it is doing a great job. So, I don't see any value in just saying, well, that person needs to go just because the document says, we have to move somebody around every 2 or 3 years. And here's some benefits of keeping those leaders around. They have institutional knowledge, so they know how things work around here. They may have really great established relationships with key stakeholders, and so they're able, to get things done, basically. They're efficient. They know how things work. And it allows for some leadership stability, so things tend to move along a lot easier for the organization. And you can balance that with the need for diversity if there's some challenges with diversity. And there are other things we can do to make sure that we're mitigating that diversity. So you can have some term limits with exceptions. So maybe there's a renewal clause, so like say you have a 2 to 3 term limit for whatever it is, whether it's for a board or a committee, board member position. And maybe you allow an extension or reappointment if no qualified replacements are available, or if the member performs exceptionally well. But you have to have a transparent review process. What qualifies as performing well? You don't just say, I like him, he's my buddy. You have to have some criteria there. Maybe you have staggered terms where only some of the board or the committee is set up for rotation, so that there's still some continuity on the board or committee. And then some planning for development of other people that are going to take over. And make it structured. There's some formal mentorship and succession planning to groom replacements, so that you have somebody who's really capable of taking over. And again, we can have some diversity and inclusion requirements. And again, these can include guidelines from the board and committee composition to promote diversity. And again, this is just setting this committee or board up for success. And have regular performance reviews. Again, we can have those criteria identified. And I can't emphasize enough how important I think conflict of interest disclosure policies are, and make sure that those are defined and reviewed, and making sure that everyone's adhering to that. And then if you really feel like, that person needs to rotate off, but we value their input and we would like to keep them around, maybe they're in an advisory role. And that way they are still there, they still have input, and that way whoever is coming in next still gets their feedback and their input. So I think those are things that we can consider in those situations, instead of just saying, oh my gosh, we have to change everybody over. So things to consider. All right, so let's go back to monitoring bias. So this is a really important one that I absolutely have seen. Sponsored interest. So sponsored content dominance. So if a significant portion of the organization's content, research, or events is heavily influenced or dictated by sponsors, it may divert attention from the industry's broader needs. So basically, if it just basically means one company or, whatever is putting all the money into the event, and so therefore they're getting a lot of opportunity or attention. And that may kind of drive the agenda. We'll talk a little bit more about this a little bit later. So that's one thing we would need to monitor. And then is there a narrow focus on issues? So is the event or content that this trade organization is producing, are they ignoring certain things? Are they ignoring emerging topics? Are they ignoring controversial topics? Why? Why would they do that? Why would they do that? Is there a reluctance to address these things because maybe it doesn't align with the interests of influential members or the sponsors? If that's the case, then that would be a red flag for me for that particular trade organization. I would want to investigate that more and say, well, why is that organization taking that particular position? What's going on behind the scenes? Does it have to do with funding? What's the conflict of interest here? Is it a personal agenda thing? So that to me suggests some kind of bias going on there, right? So these are things that you might have observed. So that means I would want to see an opaque decision-making process, and maybe there isn't that. Is there a lack of transparency of how decisions are made, such as choosing the content that is developed and approved? And that could be about things like, what conference content is selected, who's going to be on the podcast, what articles are submitted for newsletters, things like that. You'd want to know, well, what's your process? How do you decide? What's the criteria for accepting particular content? How do you decide what is going to be the information that comes through this trade organization? The committees, do they have an opportunity for an open meeting that you can attend? Some committees will do closed meetings and then an open meeting, so that there's some that's closed and some that's open. And then biased and imbalanced publications. So are there publications always just supporting one viewpoint or theory, or do you get something that's kind of giving you both sides of the equation? Here's this, and then here's that, for you to consider. So those are things that you can look at as well. Let's see what else. So basically it comes down to, you have to use your critical thinking skills. So is the content intentionally biased or misleading? Is it misinformation? Is it disinformation? Or in some cases, is it just maybe very progressive and it's the latest evidence? And so it might be new information for the organization, and people are having to do a little, deep dive on, oh my gosh, I haven't heard that before. And so I'm going to have to investigate more and learn more about it. So critical thinking skills become really, really important here. All right. Unequal access to opportunities. So again, this comes back to, are the same people, are companies repeatedly giving speaking slots or awards or visibility? And again, that's one of those things we'd want to monitor. Are there, and so here's another one, barriers to participation. And I think a lot of us have experienced this, where going to conferences is expensive. And I think, for me, my company is just me. I said I've gone to conferences for 28 years now. I have to budget for that, and I have to be very selective which ones I will go to, because it all comes out of my pocket. Now, there's some people, they're depending on their employer to pay for that. And so some people just cannot go to an event, or they can't go to a meeting twice a year. So it's actually the funding that makes it impossible for them to participate. And so think about that. If some people have all the money and make it so that they can go, then they might have more opportunity for exposure. And so it makes it unbalanced in that regard, So that's one of those factors that may be impacting who may have more opportunity than others. And but it doesn't always impact things like publications. You may still be able to commit or participate on a committee. Maybe you can do that via Zoom or things like that. But those things can be barriers to participation. So those are things to consider. But again, we can use our critical thinking skills on some of these things. So like, does the individual's contributions serve the broader needs? So if we are seeing some people that are maybe presenting more often, do these professionals deliver content and skills that are both highly valued by members, and maybe they're not easily sourced from other providers? So there may be some repeat presenters that the organization really is valuing, and there's no conflict of interest, things of that nature. So I'm not saying that not having diversity is always bad. It's just one of those things that you would want to evaluate. And then, is there a double standard? So this goes back to that conflict of interest policy. So are they being applied equally across the board for everybody? Because again, sometimes influential members or sponsors might be getting the opportunity to do something that somebody else might not be permitted that same opportunity. So you might have to look for those. And if somebody is willing to address that, does the organization respond to that? And so that would be another thing you might want to check for if you're trying to monitor that bias, which is scary, not something everybody wants to take on. I get it. And again, we're going to talk about this a little bit more, the funding concentration. If the organization heavily relies on funding from just a few sponsors or companies, this can lead to funding bias, which we'll talk about. And that can influence the organization's agenda, content, or policy, which then again leads to a conflict of interest. And then if that feedback from members is ignored, that would be another one of those red flags, right? So that might lead to members kind of saying, well, I don't know if I want to participate, right? And then, members start to kind of like, I don't know if I want, I feel a little uncomfortable. I know I certainly have left some organizations, when I was starting to see some of these red flags. And again, also if it makes it so, because basically some people are feeling like, well, I can't get in. I don't have an opportunity here. There's no opportunities for me to participate or share things that I've learned or share my experiences. So maybe I'm going to move on, or my feedback is not being acknowledged. Yeah, so that kind of ties into this one. So you might get high turnover and disengagement. People basically kind of are like, not a home for me. so maybe I'm going to move on. All right. So this kind of leads into, I've been kind of touching on some of these things here and there, but we'll kind of give a little bit of a broader overview of them. Basically, the types of bias we can monitor. So there's opportunity bias, there's sponsorship bias, there's funding bias, and there's confirmation bias. And each of these can be overlapping. They can all be, one can be happening and one not happening. They can all kind of work together, and they all can impact the fairness and diversity of information and representation within trade organizations. So we'll kind of touch on these a little bit again. So opportunity bias occurs when opportunities like speaking engagements, publishing, or leadership roles are not equally available to all members, offering favor to those with better connections or higher visibility. And so what this can do is it can lead to some individuals or companies repeatedly being featured or making decisions, resulting in a narrow range of represented perspectives. And so this might include, or exclude, I should say, smaller companies, newer entrants, or members from underrepresented groups. And so what can you do about it? You can, the trade organization or maybe an individual can implement a transparent process for selecting contributors and speakers, including open calls for participation. You can develop outreach programs to actively invite underrepresented members to contribute, and you can create mentorship and training programs to help less visible members gain opportunity. So that's one of those biases. And I want to share some examples of things that I have observed over the years. So I would say that I've certainly seen, like, there's a podcast out there that, if you actually do the math, it predominantly features guests from one particular company. There was a conference where there was a slot that opened up, somebody canceled. And rather than sort of say, we have this open slot, let's use a process to fill it, the board a friend of the board was inserted into that slot, and basically that person got kind of a more highly visible, longer speaking slot that kind of was a special favor as opposed to fairly selected. There was another conference where again, this was quantified. The bulk of the conference presentations were from one or two closely aligned companies, and that happened several years. This is still ongoing. Board of directors and committees featuring members predominantly from one or two companies, and relatively small companies, to be quite honest. And then this is still ongoing. Multiple trade organizations having leadership positions held by members from predominantly one company. So, when you think about that basically creates a situation where, over years, think about, 20 years of our industry, that most of the information is coming from limited sources as opposed to quite a few sources. And so that can have quite an impact on the information that is being representative of a trade organization going out to our community. So that's pretty significant. Now, if we go back to sponsorship bias, this occurs when content or information is influenced by the interests of sponsors, potentially skewing what is presented to favor those who provide financial or other support. And so an example that I have experienced and seen several times is that basically a person offered their services as a keynote to several trade organizations, and basically the way it was arranged was they would say, hey, I'll pay all my expenses. You don't have to pay for anything if I can have the keynote slot. And so that happened several times over the course of the last 28 years of my experience as a conference goer. And, that creates a barrier for other people who have the potential to be a keynote, who don't have that financial opportunity, who aren't in those positions to pay for the opportunity to be the keynote for a trade organization, who may have great information as well, but would not have the financial means to do this. So this can lead to biased information where the content disproportionately reflects the interests of sponsors rather than the broader membership. And it can also reflect the suppression of topics that may be critical of sponsors, right? So if somebody has a conflicting view, then that doesn't get represented. So what can be done to address that? You can establish clear guidelines separating sponsorship from editorial control of content creation. You can ensure transparency by disclosing sponsorships and any potential conflicts of interest, or offer platforms for independent content that is not influenced by sponsorship. And of course, having a practice of, selecting your keynote without, financial backing, I think is also having that not be influenced by finances, I think is also an appropriate strategy as well. So funding bias, this occurs when research content or organizational initiatives are influenced by their funding sources, potentially prioritizing topics or outcomes that align with funders' interests. So the example I can give you in our world that I've seen is that there was a trade organization that allocated financial support for a very specific campaign or project that was very much selected by a specific individual member that was influential in the organization, and that became the project, and and it was like, okay, that's the one, and everybody had to throw their monies and support behind that one, as opposed to one that was maybe selected by the membership or the organization. And so it kind of limits the scope of topics covered and may prevent the exploration of issues that may be critical to the industry. But it's not aligned with the funder's goal, right? So this was kind of this person's project that they wanted funded, and it turned into becoming the trade organization's project that they funded. And so it can lead to an imbalance of what gets supported. Again, strategies: diversify funding sources to reduce reliance on a few key funders. Implement funding policies that promote independence in research and content creation, and ensure funding is allocated based on transparent criteria that reflect the broader needs of the industry. So again, maybe you have a policy about how, how does the organization select, as opposed to, hey, this person said, I want this one. Are y'all good with that? All right, and let's talk about confirmation bias. We've talked about this one before, so I'm not, we've got a whole live stream on that, and I'll certainly refer everybody to that in a moment here. Confirmation bias is the tendency to seek and interpret and present information in a way that confirms pre-existing beliefs or theories while disregarding or undervaluing contrary evidence. So I think some examples we've seen in the world of animal training, and again, these are trends that are emerging right now. So we've got people saying negative reinforcement is bad all the time, or that there's no way you can provide genuine choice in animal training, or that you have to use imprinted owls, they're the only ones you can train. And of course, we are seeing emerging information that is showing that there are alternatives to all those statements. So the impact is this, if you see statements like that without showing alternative information, it can result in selective dissemination of information that supports, just that viewpoint within the organization, which basically marginalizes all these, alternative arguments, which we are now seeing is coming out with some really great information that's really good for animals. So it can hinder the adoption of new practices and the acknowledgement of emerging issues. So what could you do? Promote a culture of critical thinking, which we really try to do here, and encourage diverse viewpoints and discussions and publications. Include a peer review process and independent evaluations for research and content. So, again, I really love that idea of having more eyes on things. Create platforms specifically for dissenting and or minority opinions within the industry to be expressed and considered. All right, so A lot of background there. And, and again, some observations of things that we've seen. So, what can we do? So, I wanted to talk a little bit more about conquering this opportunity divide. It's one thing to just say, hey, these are the things we observe, but it would be really great to talk about, well, what are some things we can do? So hopefully we can work more towards like, hey, let's help our industry progress and move forward, and work towards sharing more good information as much as we possibly can. So I think that advocating for diversity in leadership, if it's warranted, is still a great goal. And so nominating candidates outside the usual pool, especially those from underrepresented backgrounds, is awesome, and push for a broader representation of companies and perspectives in decision-making roles. And, the tough thing, of course, is finding people that want those positions and have the time and energy to spend in those roles. And again, I go back to those slides that we looked at, keeping in mind, if we've got good leaders in place, it doesn't mean we automatically push them out. I would see, is there still room for them? Are they doing great jobs? Do we want to keep them on as advisors? Do we, or maybe they stick around and they keep doing their good work? And so, do some critical thinking there before we just say, oh, they have to move on. Monitor and enforce conflict of interest policies. I think this one is really, really critical. And if it's a concept that you're not familiar with, then I would encourage you to kind of study that a little bit more. But those do need to be created and understood, and understand what that looks like, so that we can be a little bit better at monitoring those. It's different. Like, I'm on my own platform here, so, I can promote anything I want. But when I'm at a trade organization, I do really consciously think about, I'm here to serve the organization. I'm not, it's not supposed to be about serving my own personal interests. And so, that work is volunteer, but the long-term goal is progressing the industry for the greater good. So, we always have to think about that when we're working in that capacity. Demand transparency in the process. So it would be great to have some really good documentation about, what's the criteria for selecting all these different things, whether it's speakers, board members, content creators, and what's the vetting process for these things. We did, I think, for some of the trade organizations I work for, we've done some really good work in creating documentation for some of these processes. And to me, that was some really great work that we're contributing to the field, and I would love to see that occurring across the board. And yeah, there can be blind evaluations as well. So all those things, I think, really just help us raise the bar. We can be vigilant about bylaw changes. And again, I know they're no fun to read, having done it before. But, you have to pay attention to those changes that concentrate power, that are, without some maybe caveats. We talked about some caveats earlier, but if it's just sort of, an unlimited, this person gets to stay here forever and ever without us, ever questioning it, I would be sort of like, well, wait a minute, because I have seen that happen in some trade organizations. I think raising concerns in a way that's appropriate. Talking about these topics here, I've thought about these for a long time, but this is literally 28 years of observation kind of condensed into an hour. This isn't something that, I've just said, I'm going to, suddenly do a live stream on this. I mean, I've been thinking about these things for a long time. I've considered my own behavior. I've considered, things that I've observed. I've considered things that, and again, there's two sides to it, for sure. Trying to make sure that we're trying to serve this industry. So, when it's saying documenting instances of biases or conflicts of interest, it isn't about just a one-time complaint. It's sort of saying, are you seeing trends? And that's kind of what I was noticing, is like, I'm seeing over time sort of this repeated things that maybe are going unchecked, and maybe it's time that we sort of be a little bit more on top of some things. We've started to see, like, where trade organizations have added more more terms for people to agree to when they are registering for a conference, code of conducts and things like that. And I think this is just another one of those areas where we maybe have to start being a little bit more on top of, do we have some guidelines and some policy in effect here? So it's not about just, complaining or saying, oh, this isn't good, but maybe, okay, what are the trends we're seeing here? Maybe we need to have some more some balance here, and making sure that we're on top of those, so that we are really truly providing fair opportunities. Like we're saying, maybe those keynote slots are advertised widely and competitively, and we're and last minute replacements are, selected with, some criteria, not just, hey, here's my buddy. What else? Encourage critical thinking in the community. So we need to, continue with our process of helping people evaluate articles and presentations and other content with using their critical thinking skills. So avoiding the favoritism based on friendships, financial incentives, or other non-merit factors. We want good quality content coming out there. And what are those ethical standards for the trade organizations? So again, this is addressing those conflict of interest policies, making sure that it's not about overt self-promotion and educational content for a trade organization, that is. I mean, it's okay on your private platforms, I get that. It's ensuring trade organizations prioritize their mission over individual gain. And so this is where, again, for me on a private platform, I would say if you're challenged in the trade organization world, feeling like it's not meeting your needs, we do have alternative pathways. So, I do this all the time. I get my education outside of trade organizations if I am feeling it is biased, So I go to other resources that I think are doing a good job with trying to find evidence-based information, and also applying it in the real world. So, so these are sources that, I enjoy, that they're private platforms, but I feel like they're trying to do a really good job of educating our community. So, they offer online courses, webinars, workshops that I think are high quality. And so we can engage with those independent experts, researchers, or smaller organizations that value evidence-based practices. But of course, we still have to use our critical thinking skills when we evaluate those alternative resources. So, and again, we're checking for evidence-based content, credibility of the educators, and do they align with our scientific or ethical standards. We can look for transparency in their sources, their goals, their funding, their affiliations. And I am also wary of self-promotion disguised as education, or biased perspectives that lack peer review or industry consensus. So, so I don't go to every platform out there. I go to some specific platforms. So, you don't have to only go to a trade organization for your resources. There are private opportunities for education. And so what else can we do? We can continue to build alliances. We can work with like-minded members to advocate for shared concerns, and we can leverage our collective power to push for changes in policy and practices. So, working together to build that informed community. So we can share our high-quality external resources with our peers and our colleagues, and we can encourage the community to continue to value evidence-based educational opportunities over that reliance on regressive or stagnant resources. If you see things are just not changing, then hey, move on. And I will honestly say that I have definitely, like I was saying, I think I don't know if I said this number or not, but I was looking at the different trade organization conferences I have attended over the years, and it's something like 15 different trade organizations. Now, I don't go to all of those anymore. So clearly I have sort of kind of made my choices in terms of which ones are maybe more relevant to me, which ones I feel like are doing a good job in sharing good information in a way that, speaks to me and feels like, okay, they're, I like the way they disseminate information. So, yeah, some of them come and go for me based on some of the things we talked about here today. And I know that was a lot of words for me today, but it's a topic I've been thinking about for a long time. So I'm going to kind of take us here to the recap. But I think trade organizations have significantly influenced the information shaping the animal training industry, especially over the last 2 decades. And again, looking back on it, this influence emphasizes the importance of well-vetted, diverse, representative, and unbiased content to ensure optimal outcomes for animal care and training practices. So it's really important, that we're paying attention to what's going on there. So the production and dissemination of content by trade organizations, it can lack consistent formal oversight, leaving room for variability in the quality and objectivity of the information shared. So maybe to mitigate these risks, implementing robust practices to identify and counteract opportunity bias, sponsorship bias, funding bias, and confirmation bias, I think is something we should be looking at. And so for those navigating the training landscape, applying your critical thinking skills is still really essential to assess content validity rather than assuming it's just automatically good stuff. We have to be careful. And additionally, exploring alternative educational sources provides avenues for expanding knowledge and ensuring access to diverse perspectives. So I know that was a lot of talking on my part this time. Everybody just kind of listened. Harry says, I appreciate your commitment to progress. Yeah, sorry, I did a lot of talking this time, but yeah, it's just, stuff to ponder, stuff to consider. And I don't know how familiar everyone here is with trade organizations and, both sides of the coin, having, maybe attended conferences or maybe participated in committees or board of directors. But there's a lot, to think about because it does impact our world and but it's not the be all end all. We have other ways to continue to learn and grow. But stuff we still need to pay attention to. I mean, at the moment, I still participate with 2 trade organizations on as an advisor to 2 committees and on 1 committee. It does take time and effort. I don't know that I'll do it forever because it does impact, my work as in terms of, takes away from the work I can do for you all here. But yeah, oh, that was my bird playing with a toy. But stuff I think about, and hopefully the work that we do with those committees, we tried. I do think about this stuff that we talked about, and we try to, implement guidelines so that we're following things in a way that is helping the industry and not, just serving individuals. And Cynthia says, wow, I never knew much about all those things. Isn't that, oops, sorry, my camera fell. Isn't that interesting? I don't know. I guess sometimes I just assume everybody knows these things, but maybe not. So maybe there was some value in talking about those things. Okay. Interesting. Very interesting. Yeah. I guess sometimes you forget, when you're just doing those things all the time, you just assume everybody knows all those things. All right. Maybe not. Okay. Well, we're coming up on the hour here. So let me tell you, I hope my camera is going to stay in position. It's being very persnickety. Let me help it stay in position. I'm going to do some things here. Oh, there we go. That'll help a little bit. I'm going to mention a few resources. Again, we love talking about critical thinking. So a few critical thinking resources for you. The journal article Gems from Junk one. I still love that one so much. I just think it's such a great resource. And then we do have the one on confirmation bias. Really good live streams to help you with the critical thinking. And then, again, depending on how much you've been following things in the news this week in the animal training world, we've had some more losses. And so even though this is about talking about loss of a trained animal, I do think it's really relevant for any kind of loss. And so I just want to share this one for anyone who's coping with loss. I think it might give you a little bit of comfort. And if you want to go back to that one, I do recommend that. And also this particular course on emotions is also another really good one to just help you kind of think about what you can do with addressing some of the emotions you might be experiencing if you are dealing with some of those losses. So, so more things to consider. And then again, some of the things coming up, that ZAA semi-annual meeting in which Joe Lang is hoping to join. Well, as far as I know, he's still joining us. That is on February 12th, just a few weeks away. So again, it will be an intimate get-together, so you'll get an opportunity to really hang out and get to know Joe and spend some time with him. That'll be on February 12th. And if you can't join us there, June 12th, and probably a little bit warmer, you can join us in London. And there is a virtual option for that, but the on-site option is only 100 spaces, so come there. So if you want to come in person, you'll have to register for that soon because that one's filling up fast. And then if you found this of interest, I know this was a lot of words and a lot of stuff to think about, more about our industry than specific animal training activities. But there is the citation for that. And in general, if you like what we do, here are some ways you can support us. You can always shop our merchandise. You can go to the store on animaltrainingfundamentals.com, or you can shop here on YouTube. Other ways to support us, you can share our newsletter. You can become a member of animaltrainingfundamentals.com. You can share this video. If you are a member, you can get your animal training credentials. We have lots of ways where you can get credit for studying this content, and you can put that on your resume, you can put it on your website, you can put it on your performance evaluations so that you can demonstrate you are studying all this content. And for members, we do have a Tower Talk tomorrow. So come join us and chat some more about this topic or anything you want to talk about. We can talk about your animal training success or your challenges, and be great to get together with you. If you're not a member, here's how you can join. We have a monthly individual option. You can cancel at any time if you just want to test us out for a little bit. Annual, you get a 20% savings. And then our best deal is our facility option, where you can have up to 200 individual sub-accounts, all with their own tracking, their own badges, all that fun stuff. All right, there. Oh, there we go. My camera's still in a bad spot. All right, there we go. All right. Well, we are done for the day, it looks like, and we actually ended on time. I have to tell you, making all making this particular live stream was a lot of work. Making all those images took a lot of time, but I got to get my feet wet doing some AI creation with the images. But yeah, so there you go. Some interesting stuff to think about and ponder. And maybe we can discuss it tomorrow at the live stream. But of course, we can always discuss other things too, like what you're doing with your training projects and your challenges, which is always fun too. But yeah, I hope you all are staying warm, and I will look forward to talking to some of you tomorrow. All right, so with that, I hope you will enjoy the rest of your day, and I will see some of you tomorrow. Take care, everybody. Bye-bye.